My name is Grzegorz Ekiert. I'm professor of government and the director of the Davis Center. And I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the 2026 Zaleski Lecture. So Zaleski Lecture was established in 1983 by the family of August Zaleski, who was the Polish diplomat, economist, and politician. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs twice in the government before the Second World War. And then after the war, he became the president of the Polish government in exile. And we are very grateful to Zaleski family that they created this opportunity for all of us to have meetings, events on Poland to discuss Polish affairs, Polish politics, Polish culture. We had many distinguished visitors over the years. If you are interested who was here as a Zaleski lecturer, you can find the list on CES website. But this year, Zaleski lecture will be delivered by Agnieszka Holland, the legendary Polish film and television director and screenwriter. Agnieszka Holland is also a very prominent public intellectual who shapes public debates, not only in Poland, but across the world. It is my very special honor, Agnieszka, to welcome you to Harvard University and to the Center for European Studies. Before I introduce our speaker in more detail, I would like to thank the entire staff of the Center for European Studies for all the work they've done organizing this event. And in particular, I would like to thank Anna Popiel for her outstanding efforts to make this event happen. So Agnieszka Holland graduated in 1971 from the Film and TV School of the Academy of Performing Arts in Prague, where she studied under Miklos Forman and Ivan Passer. After returning to Poland, she launched her film career through collaboration with the celebrated directors of the Polish movie school, with Andrzej Wajda, Krzysztof Zanussi, and Krzysztof Kieślowski. Her first international success was in 1978 film Provincial Actors, which won the International Critics' Prize in Cannes. The film became a crowning example of the cinema of moral anxiety that shaped the history of Polish film in the 1970s and 1980s. Those films confronted mechanisms of governing life in communist Poland. They show ways in which people could reject conformism and be in defense of moral integrity. Other giants of the Polish film during that period include Wajda, of course, Zanussi, Kieślowski, but also Kijowski, Zaorski, and Falk. Now, Agnieszka Holland has received more than 70 nominations at the major film festivals, including 3 Academy Award nominations. The first one was for Angry Harvest in 1985, then Europa Europa in 1990, and In Darkness in 2011. In 2017, her film Spór, adopted from the novel of Olga Tokarczuk, won a Silver Bear in the Berlin International Film Festival. In 2020, film Green Border received a special jury prize at the Venice Film Festival, and Charlatan in 2020 was nominated for Best Director at the European Film Awards. Her latest film, France, is a biographical drama focusing on iconic 20th century Czech writer Franz Kafka. Those of you who saw the film probably agree with me that this is the magnificent cinematographic achievement. I think this is probably, the most incredible film in your career. Now, today, Agnieszka Holland will reflect on the relationship between cinema and society and on modern-day utopia. There is a tradition for the Zaleski lecture to involve distinguished member of Harvard faculty as a moderator or commentator. And I'm delighted that Professor Peter Gordon agreed to participate in today's event. Professor Gordon is Amabel James Professor of History at Harvard University and resident faculty at the Minda de Gunzburg Center for European Studies. He is the leading scholar of modern European philosophy and critical theory. His work has profoundly shaped contemporary interpretations of Frankfurt School and major thinkers such as Adorno, Habermas, and Heidegger. He's the author of numerous books and himself a prominent public intellectual. Professor Gordon teaches social theory, history, and philosophy at Harvard. Now, we are going to proceed in the following way. We will ask Agnieszka Holland to deliver some remarks. Then Peter Gordon will start the conversation, and then we'll open the floor to the public. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to this podium, Agnieszka.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. It's a real honor. And calling me public intellectual is a bit exaggerated. The filmmakers are not the intellectuals, they are physical workers. They wake up around 4 a.m. and they work about 14, 15 hours every day. So our brain is really not very prolific, but I will try to do my best, because it's, I'm in academia and I have to stand to the standards. I hope so. I will be reading, and excuse me if my accent sometimes makes some words not understandable. You have just imagined what I wanted to tell. It will be mainly about dystopia. Dystopia is a concept from literature and philosophy that describes a fictional world or society which, at first glance, may appear orderly or even ideal, but is in fact oppressive, inhuman, and deprives the individual of freedom. Its key features include strong control of power over citizens, for example, totalitarian rule or constant surveillance, limitations on individual freedom of thought, speech, and choice, manipulation or information or history, dehumanization of society, people treated as instruments, apparent order and security, both at the cost of suffering and subjugation. Dystopias often function as warnings. They show where certain ideologies, technologies, or social trends may lead if they spiral out of control. Creative writers and filmmakers frequently assume a prophetic role. In times of uncertainty, chaos, problems not easily solved, or threats not yet visible, philosophers and artists cultivate the capacity to see reality from multiple angles, a kind of Musselian eventualism from the man without qualities, which is itself a condition for freedom of thoughts. There are creators with the imagination of Stanisław Lem, Polish philosopher and sci-fi writer, who already in the 1950s anticipated many technological changes and their philosophical and social consequences. Film and literature, both serious and popular, possesses a prophetic dimension. Many catastrophic or dystopian visions first appeared in popular films and later re-emerged in reality. One might say that the intuition of certain creators who explore the present and imagine what may follow sometimes comes true with unsettling precision, shaping reality in the process. Some social dystopias can almost be read as self-fulfilling prophecies. Take Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which became the basis for the widely watched series produced around the time Donald Trump first won the presidency. When Atwood's novel appeared, it could be read as extreme fantasy or as a critic aimed primarily at radical religious movements. Today it reads as a foresight of a growing conservative backlash that undermines the agency of women and of non-white ethnic groups and seeks to strip them of rights. In similar way, works once enjoyed mainly as entertainment, for example, The Lord of the Rings, and became increasingly resonant metaphor for power structures and political methods we observe today. To give a scale, a sense of scale, here are just a few well-known dystopian films and series: Brazil, Terminator, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, The Day After Tomorrow, Dr. Strangelove, Mad Max, The Matrix, 1984, Children of Men, Blade Runner, Minority Report, Gattaca, Snowpiercer, Soylent Green, 1973, La Jetée, and redoing American of that film, 12 Monkeys, Contagion, Fallout, Silo, District 9, Melancholia, Take Shelter, Don't Look Up, Civil War. Late Soviet dystopias form a distinct category, like Stalker or Dead Man's Letter. They deserve attention. They are, in effect, the Soviet threats. Made before Chernobyl, they feel like warning no one could stop. Visitor to a Museum, 1989, presents a ruined, flooded world ruled by decay and resignation. Civilization collapses spiritually before it collapses physically. Day of Eclipse, 1988, based on Strugatsky's brother's novel, evokes science, desertification, and cosmic indifference. The threat is incomprehensible and seemingly unstoppable. Soviet anticipations differs from the American variety, contemporary American variety, contemporary to them, where narratives often allow for some positive outcome and heroic figures. In Soviet dystopia, threats are never resolved. Heroes are tired, complicit, or powerless. Science is not salvation. The future feels already decided. The tone of these films helps explain a certain passivity within societies under oppressive rule. The pervasive sense that submission is inevitable, that the future does not depend on free will or individual choices, but on a fate they cannot be resisted, that hope is an illusion. Undoubtedly, one goal of Putin's hybrid strategy is to infect Europeans with such resigned nihilism, and to considerable extent he succeeds. A decade ago, people returned to Orwell. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, he had become something of a dusty classic. By 2016, Orwell's 1984 topped Amazon's bestseller list, with Philip Roth, The Plot Against America, close behind. The popularity of dystopias and alternative histories began earlier and grew alongside rising uncertainty about the nature of modern threats. The role of artists and philosophers is not only to describe and analyze the past or present, but also to imagine the consequences of current trends and sketch possible models of social development and humanity's future. The dark forces of dystopian tales can deepen resignation, a sense of hopelessness and inevitability. The belief that the world is ruled by the strong and the brutal, that it has always been so and must remain so, that faith in democracy, human rights, equality, freedom, dignity, the rule of law, and solidarity was naive illusion or hypocritical performance. Or, conversely, Dystopian fiction can provoke the creation of alternatives. As philosopher Agata Bielik-Robson argues, literary imagination allows us to leap toward reality and attack it in ways that reveal pockets of different, perhaps better, possibilities. A refusal to trust the creative power of fictional narrative, a disbelief in imagination, reshapes our minds to fit an allegedly unchangeable reality. Creativity is the capacity to hold multiple potentialities. Excessive adaptation to the world around us, what Adorno called the shame of adaptation, robs us of vision of escape from an increasingly oppressive condition. At the turn of 1930s and 1940s, George Orwell wrote, "Monsters began to rule the world." Orwell appeared in my film about the Great Famine in Ukraine, Mr. Jones. A famine in Ukraine in 1932-33, a crime engineered by Stalin that starved millions. The film's main character was the young Welsh journalist Gareth Jones, who secretly entered areas of Soviet Ukraine close to foreigners and witnessed people dying of hunger with his own eyes. Then resolved to tell the world, Western politicians, and global public opinion. But the world did not want to listen. Western politicians were ready to do business with Stalin. Many intellectuals and artists of interwar Europe, eager to believe that communism offers a new chance for humanity, especially as fascism was rising, rejected the truth about Stalin's crimes. Gareth Jones' revelations were ultimately discredited by Walter Duranty, the New York Times correspondent in Moscow and a Pulitzer Prize recipient. Whether Duranty was bought, blackmailed, or genuinely convinced that the end justified the means, he denied the famine and branded Jones a liar. This episode shows how corrupt or compromised media, self-interested politicians, and society's craving comfort can suppress its facts. People eager to preserve their comfort often sacrifice their humanity, their respect for others, and their humanistic or Christian values, and usually end by losing both the values and the comfort they sought to protect. We made that film a few years after the annexion of Crimea and assault of Donbass, and a few years before the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. We made it as a warning, updating interwar mechanisms, sensing that what was coming, yet still believing that facts, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and international law are values worth defending, and that people like Gareth Jones, who ultimately paid with his life for his courage, can serve as examples and challenges. That hope is now evaporating with extraordinary speed. Narratives of freedom, liberal democracy, a united Europe, human rights, and equality are losing their appeal. They seem empty and barren. Yet, these narratives were the foundation upon which the West was rebuilt after World War II. After 1989, those zones of values were extended to Central and Eastern Europe, also to Poland. It seemed that the movement toward democracy was one-directional. The experience of World War II and the Holocaust terrified those who lived through it, prompting the belief that cooperation and the disarming of national egoisms were conditions of survival and progress. From that belief, the European Union was born, an organism meant, without denying diversity, to respond jointly to modern challenges and to provide citizens with prosperity, equal opportunity, and security. These challenges are global and require collective responses. Climate catastrophe and the migration crisis it triggers, pandemics, technological revolutions and their risks, globalization and growing inequalities, civilizational and cultural changes many struggle to follow. None can be addressed by a single state or even a single continent. We need cooperation, courage, and imagination to understand the consequences of the internet revolution, social media, and artificial intelligence, and to transform potential mortal threats into opportunities for humanity. For a time, it seemed that the European project was a success, and there was not plausible alternative. Some even spoke of the end of history. Meanwhile, however, from the margins and then into the mainstream, crawled currents recalling pre-war Italian fascism, a mix of revolutionary nihilism and conservative reaction, a cult of brutal force and contempt for what is perceived as weaker, including what had been regarded as soft power, cooperation, compromise, respect for difference. This content extends to diversity, the less powerful, the poor, the rule of law, the international institutions, to regulations, treaties, and obligations. Populist politicians with authoritarian tendencies, amplified by digital platforms and increasingly precise algorithms, have pushed these ideas into majority and into power across many Western countries. We thought the West, chastened by Nazism, would be resistant to such threats, and yet it is not immune. Close to the current American administration, billionaires and public figures have questioned foundational values. Less than a year ago, Elon Musk claimed that the fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy, undermining one of our culture's core pillars. This rhetoric was soon echoed in policy and reinforced through strategic decisions, while a US president told the New York Times recently that he sees no constraint on his most extreme actions apart from his own morality. Under communism in Poland, the satirical comedy Miś, Teddy Bear, directed by Stanisław Bareja, was immensely popular. It depicted an institution run by an authoritarian and absurdly incompetent director. The film's metaphor for communist power retained its appeal even in democratic Poland and remains widely watched. In one famous scene, a clockroom attendant brazenly steals clients' coats, and when asked to return one, replies, "I don't have your coat, and what will you do to me?" That line became a refrain during the populist right-wing rule of law and justice under Jarosław Kaczyński. Today, we see such cloakroom attendants as leaders of several major powers. When backed by force, this posture gains broader acceptance. It happens that on the day Donald Trump won the US presidency for the first time, I was directing an episode of House of Cards. Our Oval Office set stood not far from the real White House. Even while filming the previous season, I had felt we were doing something risky. Americans tend to believe what they see on television. If creators portray Washington politicians and the president as a mafia of pathological narcissistic cynics, willing to use violence and lies to retain power, how could viewer not conclude that real politics looks exactly the same? When Trump won, continuing the series suddenly felt pointless. Frank Underwood left the screen and seemed to take up residence in the real White House, and reality's ambition and influence surpasses those of fiction. All of this happened with astonishing speed. In the late 1990s, when trying to sell projects in Hollywood, I was told they were unacceptable because the protagonist isn't sympathetic enough, with the West Wing serving as the ideal. 10 years later, presenting similar projects, I was told they failed because the protagonist is too sympathetic. The characters audience followed had changed. Criminals and anti-heroes from Breaking Bad or Dexter or the presidential couple from the House of Cards. Evil became attractive and few demanded that it be punished. We are living through a transition as consequential and as dangerous as the invention of the printing press. That invention massively expanded the circulation of written ideas, spreading the Bible, but also the Malleus Maleficarum, and helping trigger the Reformation, which reshaped Europe and led to 2 centuries of bloody religious wars. Just as printing at the printing press and later the 19th century Industrial Revolution produced epochal upheavals, including 2 world wars. Today's technological revolution brings comparable instability. New forms of communication, the overwhelming flood of content, the impossibility of verifying everything, and the amplification of the most extreme voices undermine the authority of rational forces, including scientists. We begin to feel governed by a small, immorally wealthy elite that may wish, perhaps through artificial intelligence, to consolidate power and dismantle the dream of democracy, equality, freedom, and fraternity. They might succeed, unless artificial intelligence itself slips from human control and dominates or even destroys humanity. People are frightened, disoriented, and often helpless. They do not know which tools will bring us closer to truth and effective action for what is right, and which will instead unleash destructive forces. So far, many of these tools have been seized by false prophets and political messiahs. That is why I say, enough dystopia. We have reached a point at which only courageous art and unfettered imagination can summon a new vision of the future, a vision in which a true prophet exposes the lies of the false and proposes an alternative world of fulfilled hope, a world that neither politicians nor businessmen, neither societies nor journalists, not even scientists can yet fully imagine. I'm convinced that we need utopia now, not more dystopia, because in effect, we already live in one.
Well, Agnieszka, thank you so much for that moving talk. And
you are moved?
I am. I'm moved. Let me say before I begin, just on a personal note, that many of you, I'm sure, know Agnieszka Holland's many films. I'm familiar with some of them, but not all of them. But I'll be rectifying that soon. It so happens that although the film is not yet publicly available, my colleague Grzegorz Eckert may have mentioned that the newest film, France, is just now beginning to circulate in Europe and will soon be in theaters in North America. And I'm one of those people who would have thought you could never make a film about Kafka. Well, Agnieszka Holland has succeeded brilliantly. So thank you. If I can just take up some of the themes of your talk just now. I mean, it's a very interesting fact, and listening to the long list of films that you presented at the beginning of your lecture, it's so interesting to me that throughout the history of cinema, there have been so many films that portray apparent utopias that are in fact dystopias. And I think you didn't mention Metropolis, but I might put that way back at the beginning.
With many more, you know, it was just taking from the heart like that, randomly.
So many, and I tried to make a list as you went, but I couldn't keep up. 12 Monkeys, Soylent Green, as you know. You all know the secret of Soylent Green? People, yeah, very good. Okay, I just wanted to make sure you all know that. The fact that the history of cinema has shown us so many cases of apparent utopias that are in fact dystopias seems to me an interesting thing. And yet, you've ended with an extraordinary claim, which is that so much of our world has now become dystopia, that we need a cinema that pushes back, that sustains hope, that no longer shows us the reality of dystopia as we now experience it. And I want to say that that's an extraordinary claim for several reasons. One is that in your own career in cinema, you have not shied away from some of the most difficult topics. Now, I wonder what you think about that. It seems to me you've managed to try to find, even within the history of the Holocaust, moments of redemption, small gestures of humanity that save lives and so on. So it seems to me that there's a way in which you've already been trying to push back against dystopian history with small glimpses of promise and humanity within the dystopias. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, and I asked myself in some point, I did 3 films about Holocaust somehow, even if the first one was very private, very intimate. The war is happening like out of the screen somehow, and we are observing 2 people in very complex and complicated relationship. But they were not the happy end. And I don't believe in Holocaust film which possible happy end. But telling that, I think that only way to describe that kind of the realities is when looking for the humanity, even if there are little glimpses of humanity, and even if it's ambiguous, even if it's not perfect, even if it's cowardish or corrupted a bit, you know, but still I try to looking around me or looking back to see those glimpses, and they are to me the only honest hope.
If I can press you on a question, I'm almost frightened of the answer to it. Are there small moments of utopia even in France?
Oh, France actually is a very joyful film in comparison to my others.
Okay.
Even if it ends somehow with the Holocaust and the main character dies, and the world of today is quite ironic. I think that I put much more of color and light into that film than to many of my other films. Yeah. Because I was a bit angry with the vision of Franz Kafka, you know, as that stereotypical crooked person hidden in the shadow, and I wanted to put the light on him, and I wanted to give him the chance to have the moments of joy. Yeah. So it was my kind of gift to Franz, who I deeply love.
Yeah. I won't belabor the point about the film, except for just one more point, which is I very much appreciated that you portrayed a scene of Kafka with his Prague Circle laughing as he reads
the trial
out loud. And apparently this is true, that he and his friends found this extraordinarily funny. Yeah, whereas we tend to think of Kafka.
It is funny, you know. Yeah. Of course, it's a bit like to laugh when you see your own cadaver, but still, it's funny.
Yeah. If I can turn to our political moment today, I mean, one of the striking things that you said about The Handmaid's Tale, I think, is quite sobering for all of us today, which is that when Margaret Atwood wrote her novel, it may have seemed fairly counterfactual. That is a dystopian scenario. And over the years, and then with it being made into a television series, it turned from something rather counterfactual into something like realism. The genre itself, in our experience of it, changed, which I think that is a very, very dark thought. But I want to ask, given what you said, what kind of film should a filmmaker like yourself be making today? Do you imagine a new aesthetic, or do you think that your aesthetic fulfills already the task that you declared at the end, that we need utopia?
I don't know, but I'm looking for the answer, frankly. My films are very different, but in the same time, they've been like the manifestation of the freedom, my personal or artistic freedom, and also of the fact that I care. The previous one, it was Green Border. I don't know if any of you have seen it, which is contemporary film. Action is very contemporary film. I co-wrote it with my collaborators, and after shot it practically when the events have been happening. It speaks about the humanitarian crisis on Polish-Belarusian border. It was the massive wave of migrants, mostly from the Middle East, organized by Lukashenko and Putin as some kind of the hybrid war, and pushed from Belarus, or even they didn't need to be pushed because they wanted to come to the paradise of European Union. But the Belarusian authorities organized the possibility for them to arrive to Belarusia, and after to go to the border, which is a place in the very vast primordial forest, and to pass through the wires and the stuff like that. On the beginning, it started in the summer of 2021, and on the beginning, the people who arrived there, mostly from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and some other countries, they didn't know how difficult it will be. They thought that it will be like the easy passage. And first few weeks, it was some kind of the easy passage, and after Polish authorities, Lithuanian and Latvian, because it happened on those three borders, but the Polish one was the biggest, they decided that is the great occasion to use that migration crisis for political means, and they decided to use the most cruel means to not only to stop it, because it was impossible to stop, but to create some kind, as I called it, the laboratory of the violence, which was very quickly legalized in some way, and which broke all possible laws of European Union and human rights treaties and so on. Immediately, also the non-governmental organizations started to organize and to try to help those migrants who mostly have been lost in the forest, not equipped for that, and when the winter started, they've been dying often frozen or from hunger. Authorities created the closed zone, pretty wide zone around of the border, where the humanitarian organizations and medical organizations, but also medias, didn't have the permission to go. So a part of the locals, the migrants have been practically without any kind of help. I really liked, I hated, but I was inspired by the speech of Jarosław Kaczyński, who was there, the ruler of the country, who explained why that closed zone and why the media cannot enter to that zone. He said, Americans lost the war in Vietnam because they allowed the media to be there. It means if you are doing the most terrible and cruel things and without leaving the traces, it's fine. When you have the witness to that, and when the witness has the courage to publish what he or she sees, the government is in danger and the state is in danger. It was, I felt that it's the beginning of something which unfortunately can take much wider proportions, and it did. So I decided to do the film when I see only the beginning of that process, which can lead very easily to what we've seen in late 30s of 20th century. So, but I was attacked. It was the film which had very wide success at the festivals and also the sales abroad, but provoked immediately very, very violent reactions from the authorities, who called me Nazi propaganda, Hitler propaganda, Goebbels propaganda, Putin's propaganda, Stalin's propaganda, the traitor, non-Polish, whatever, etc., etc. It came from the president of the country through the Minister of Justice, Prime Minister, Minister of Culture. It was like the massive and frankly unprecedented attack on one filmmaker, which was very helpful actually, because it was the best possible promotion for the film in Poland.
You managed to offend everybody. That's good, yeah.
Well, I didn't offend the audience then. Yeah. We had like 900,000 people in the theaters in a few weeks. And the people reacted in the way I never experienced before with my films. It means it was so emotional and provoked such a need of conversation and exchange and questions. And the Q&As after those screenings have been changed to some kind of the collective psychotherapy. So it was a great satisfaction. I was attacked that it's anti-Polish film, that I showed the people in uniform, Poles in uniform, as a cruel, sadistic people, which partly was true, because if you open the possibility to any kind of the army to do whatever they want, you encourage to be cruel, dehumanizing the possible prey. The sadistic pulsion becomes quite widespread. We see it also in Gaza, for example. But also, you know, I showed the best possible Poles, the people who are eager to take any risks just to show the simple gesture of humanity. And even among those in uniform, those gestures of humanity were present. So the question was to me, what is anti-Polish and what is pro-Polish? Who is Pole and who is not? And anyway, you know, the premiere of the film happened just before the elections, general elections, and the opposition, against all fears, won that election. And the people started to think that the situation on the border will change, but it didn't. the new government realized that that is something which old government called political gold. It means that the using the fear of the migration, the fear of others, and the hate towards those who can like attack our stability and our comfort, it's possible to gain some points. Yeah. So when I was asked by the people among many audiences if I think that the film can change the world, and if I think that my film, that film, can change the world, I say no, I don't think so. But it can change the world of some people who are watching, when watching it, open their hearts and their minds. And after some time, maybe, when looking back, it can create some point of the reflection, some kind of the reflection, where was the point, which was the point of non-return. And what I now try to figure out is if we already passed completely the point of non-return, or we still have some small chances to stop it.
Yeah, it seems to me that In Darkness is another film like that, where in the most harrowing and dystopian but real situation, you nonetheless find a figure who is turned sympathetically toward, in this case, Jews who are hiding in the sewers in Lodz, and the film has that same, it seems to me, strong contrast between a dystopian reality and then small glimpses of humanity within it. And it seems to me that that's what's so powerful, is that you show people that even in a situation that looks like it has no redemptive possibilities, there are these glimpses of people acting differently, of not giving in to cruelty, of not giving in to the system as it is. It seems to me that's a common theme.
Probably.
Yeah. I have one question about a very different kind of film that you made. I think that's particularly for an Anglophone audience. Some people may know The Secret Garden, which is a beloved children's book. And it seems to me, maybe I'm mistaken, but this seems to me anomalous in the films that you've made. This seems to me a very different kind of film.
Well, it is, because it's the only children's film I made. But it's not so completely different from my others, I think. The Secret Garden was one of my favorite books when I was a child. And I was coming back to that book many, many times. And among that author books, which she wrote many children bestsellers like Little Lord, Fault and Larry, and Little Princess, and so. But Secret Garden has that amount of like emotional symbolism, which is rare, even in the good children literature, and it makes that story very universal. And in the same time, any child who had difficult childhood, and I think 95% of childhoods are difficult, can find themselves in that story. So I did it with, not just to make the film which can make some money but because I felt that I can like give that gift to the children, and also older people like it. So if you haven't seen it, whoever you are here, of what age, you can watch that film, which I watched recently when flying to LA from Paris, and I was sitting in the business class, which is always nicer than to sit in economic class, and I've seen many screens and people watching the films, different films, because the library is quite wide in our days, and like watching like that, I think that guy is just watching isn't it Secret Garden? So I started to look into the list of the films, and I found it, and I thought I will watch a bit, and I couldn't stop. It was so good, and by the end I cried. So I said, it's timeless, really.
That's great. Well, look, I think I've monopolized time, and I'm sure people from the audience have questions. There are 2 microphones, one on each side, and if you have a question, please come down, introduce yourself, and then please ask a question.
Thank you very much for your comments. If darkness descends on these shores, is Europe capable of carrying the torch?
Of what?
If darkness descends on
these shores here,
on these shores, in other words, on North
in
America,
the United States, North America, is Europe capable of keeping the flame of democracy and liberalism alive?
Well, it looks like the Europe is only a chance for a while, but I'm not sure if we are capable enough, to stand that function. Yeah, I think that Europe, exactly is the question if Europe passed that point of no return, or is it still possible to mobilize Europe to defend some kind of the utopia. It means to defend what is resumed in French, 3 colors of French Revolution. Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
It seems that European politicians are making more of an effort to do that. So it may be up to them to stand without the support from here.
I frankly don't believe in politicians.
No, you don't. Okay. Thank you.
It's not because they are worse people than other people. I think that we've been discussing it before, that in that very moment of the history, the crisis of liberal democracy made the execution of any kind of the progressive or rational politics possible. It means the politicians became the the prisoners of the social media algorithm and opinion polls, and their space of decision is as small as, 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. What you can realize in 2 or 3 weeks. Any kind of the politics, courageous politics especially, and resolving on very complex and complicated challenges and dangers needs really the wider space and the trust. And that trust doesn't exist in any kind of societies, neither in Europe, neither here. So I don't see how they can do it, frankly. They are totally reactive.
Okay.
They know that they have
the
to.
answer you wanted.
They know, like Macron, for example, they know that he has to. But only idea they have is to steal the far-right agenda from the far-right and like making a little like wink to the people, say, but we in reality, we don't want it, but we have to pretend that we are doing that because they are doing that and we want to steal you from them. I don't know if it's clear what I'm telling.
Yes, it's clear.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, another question over here, please.
Yes, that was clear. Thank you so much for your time today and coming to Boston. I'm Avery. I'm a student at Harvard. And I had a question for you in the context of film and storytelling. You can disagree with this, but I believe that humans are kind of drawn to difficult stories. And we even see that on social media as people are affected by seeing a video of violence, but you can't scroll away, right? And I think it is worth it to create these utopian stories that you talk about, but I'm afraid that people won't be as interested in them. And I'm curious how you balance this in your mind. How do you create interesting stories with conflict that really touch people in a utopian society, in a story, for example?
Well, I'm working on that. Frankly, honestly, for last year, I'm thinking only about that. How to make something how to save the world, frankly,
Thank you. Please.
Thank you. Marta Guzek. I'm a graduate student at MIT. So throughout all your lecture, and especially with your conclusion that we already live in the utopian times, I couldn't stop thinking about dystopian. I'm sorry. Yes, dystopian times. I couldn't stop thinking about this poem by Czesław Miłosz, Piosenka o końcu świata, a song about the end of the world. I was thinking about song about the end of the world by Czesław Miłosz. Piosenka o końcu świata. And the conclusion of the poem is that there will be no other end of the world. Innego końca świata nie będzie. And this thought kept coming back. And basically what this poem and you are saying is that we are already there. There will not be a big event that will cause this dystopian world to realize. It will happen slowly. So why the cinema is so set on showing those dystopian worlds as a result, really, of those huge events, and how we can change that?
Well, those films I was quoting mostly was realized several years or even several decades ago, when the world around seemed like full of hope and to appear like the global project for the better humanity. And they somehow, in those films, you've seen that it's not true, that it can be completely different. If. And I didn't realize when I was watching most of those films that they are so premonitory, that they are so prophetic, and that somehow they are speaking about something which now we are living through. So it's why I think that, okay, it already happened. So we are here. We are in the moment when everything around can collapse completely. Or at least our life will be, even if you don't see it, it will be deprived of the liberty, of the freedom. So we have to show different perspective. But in the same time, it has to be convincing, realistic, real, and have the substance. Because I feel that most of films today lack the substance. That is nostalgic, or just describe the reality on very superficial level, and maybe only imagination and the poetry can save us. I never believed that it can happen, but now I believe it can, or at least it must.
Thank you.
Agnieszka, there's a question here from
Agnieszka, or Mrs. Holland. The scene in your film that strikes me, that sticks in my mind, is one of fantasy, obviously, and humor. It's where Stalin and Hitler are dancing together in Europa, and it's a wonderful scene. And I just wonder what the balance is when you make these films between something that is complete fantasy, but for a purpose and depiction of reality. This is more a question of your craft, I think, than of where the world is heading. But I wonder whether you'd talk about that a little bit.
Thank you. It's from here, right? I think they really danced together. I think it is not a fantasy, it happened. And the only chance of the humanity was that the two monsters like that have in some point to fight with each other. So from the dance, the war came, and that saved the world. Because if Hitler and Stalin was collaborating till the very end, I will be not sitting here, because my family, my parents will be never able to conceive me.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Nathan. I'm a student here at Harvard.
Keep your voice up.
Well.
No, I will come closer.
It'll help the audience too, though.
I also have a craft question for you, or really how your craft portrays your worldview. Your most recent film is about a writer, and a writer about whom the questions of language and identity seem particularly forefronted.
You speak about Franz
Kafka, yes. You've made films that seem to be about what it means to be Polish, Jewish, stateless, Czechoslovakian, etc. My question for you, in considering a medium like literature versus film, what are the limitations on the stories you tell and the subjects you choose? Is it geographic? Is it cultural? Or is it based in the medium or something in between? Thank you.
Well, I don't see such a difference between the film and literature. It means it is very different medium, but in the same time, it is the storytelling. It is telling the stories once by the word and waking up the imagination of the reader, and another time in much more literary way through the audiovisual narration with some time limit, and with the necessity to keep the attention of the viewer, which of course pushes you to many compromises. To keep your attention, I have to keep the pace, I have to make the story, interesting enough that you will not leave the room or put down your mobile. The film is something much more primitive as a medium. But in the same time, it's very efficient. It can be very efficient. It can be very effective. If it can reach your emotional core very, very deeply. And literature allows you the time of reflection to come back to work exactly your imagination in the way which the cinema will not, because they give you so many informations that you don't need, to imagine more. It's why I think that literature shapes your brain in a much more efficient way. And especially fictional literature, which we are reading less and less, and that is a huge mistake. Because I think that the fiction really can save the world, only fiction.
Tom Palmer, a former journalist. You named a lot of American films, some going back quite a few decades. And I wondered if you could give us a director from a contemporary director that you admire today, and maybe one going back from, like, I'm about your age, maybe back to our earlier years. Just two names, if you have some that come to mind.
Well, I admire mostly dead people, which is not a good sign for me or for the cinema of today. Among the contemporary living directors, I admire Austrian director Michael Haneke, and I admire a lot of films, but rarely I see the body of work which is really consistent. That directors, I admire so many that it means Bresson, Bergman, Fellini, Pasolini, Kurosawa, Wajda, Jan Niemann, many.
The usual suspects.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Aleksandra Przeganiska. We've met once with Agnieszka. It's so awesome to have you here. I'm with the Center for Labor and Just Economy here at Harvard, and I am an AI scholar. So I wanted to ask you about this technology. Obviously, I don't want to ask a very general question, but you mentioned something about movies already now being, to some extent, superficial.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very curious about your observations on how this technology is going to impact the industry further on. It's a very polarizing technology, AI, for many different reasons. Here in the US, it feels like it's fueling lots of scary debates, technological unemployment, you name it. And I'm very curious about your take. It's been an object of movies. Currently, it seems to be the medium, the tool. Are you inclined to experiment? Do you have a stance on it? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, as a tool, I totally admire it. It means it gives me the possibility to shape the story and to make the visuals, or not only visuals, also the sound, in the way which regular, even the special effects or visual effects are not give us that possibility. And it gives a lot of freedom, but in the same time, of course, I'm not speaking about the things that certain professions will disappear. For example, actors who live mostly from revoicing, the platforms like Netflix or HBO are not revoicing everything. So by now, it's mostly living actors who are giving their voices to the voices of actors in different language. Mm-hmm. And now it's possible with artificial intelligence to revoice the actor with his own voice in different language, and even shape his mouth in the way that it will be in sync. Mm-hmm. So it's fantastic, because not for the actors, not, but but for me as a director and also for the audience, it's fantastic because you will have the identity of the voice of real actor. It means very important part of his expression. And you will have it in your language. You will not need to read the subtitles. Most of Americans are unable to read. And so that's the example. It's something for something. But, relatively small group of people will suffer and will need to find another profession or, activity. But the large group of viewers will be satisfied. But in the same time, I have the friend in London who is some kind of the genius, I think. And he made a lot of money by creating different kind of the institutions or programs, projects, and so. And one of them, it was to have the close contacts with the most prominent scientists. Mm-hmm. And in some point, he organized every year the 2 weeks of them closed of the best scientific of different science. They locked in the apartment of one in London, and for 1 week, 2 weeks even, they've been writing about the stage of the science in that very year. Mm-hmm. It was resume of what is happening, and by the end of that, they made fantastic dinner. And I was once invited to the dinner. And that was the most interesting dinner I ever had. It was absolutely wonderful. And my friend, after it stopped in some point, but my friend is friends with them and is meeting different people. And 2 months ago, he said to me that he just had the dinner with 3 most established experts or professors of AI, one of them Nobel Prize. And the 2 of them said that this question of few years when the AI will destroy the humanity. Mm-hmm. Which sounds like science fiction or, dystopia or whatever. Yeah. And so I was very curious, and I asked my friend if he asked the question, if it's possible to include in the programs of AI some kind of the empathy for the humanity. And he said, yeah, of course I did ask it. It's an obvious question. And they answered that yes, it was possible, but we passed the moment when it was possible. It's not possible anymore. Yeah. The second question, I was curious, it was how they will destroy that humanity, which is quite big. And they say it's very simple with the viruses. So, virus. Mm-hmm. But one thought that it will not happen. So that is my hope, 1 from 3.
That glimpse of hope.
A glimpse of hope, exactly.
Okay, there's one more question.
And to finish it, because I think it's really important, it means that, whatever. I think that AI is fantastic if you have very strict rules and obligations. And unfortunately, all the politics now and the way, the societies are developing, it is against the rules and the obligations. It's what's happening with the European Union. European Union is attacked that it imposes the obligations. Even the big political party in Poland was born from the fact that European Union made the regulation that cap of the bottle has to be attached to the bottle in order not to lose the caps who are, lost and after they are not recycled and so on. People tell it's quite easy, you have to drink it like that. Sometimes it's true. Some manufacturers are not very good in doing that, and after you have the problems. But it's not a big deal, right? No, but you have the big political party which raises from month to month, where the main, the argument against the European Union is the caps. So with such an idiotic humanity, I think that the belief that we will come together with the rules for AI, like for atomic power, which is a very similar question. The atom can hit you, can give you the energy, cheap energy and clean energy, but it can destroy you in 1 second. And I think with AI, it's something similar. So, but the humanity, unfortunately, entered the area of the idiocy, so it's why I'm not sure.
Okay, one last question. This is a colleague of mine I haven't seen for a long time.
Good afternoon. My name is Piotr Kosicki. I teach history at the University of Maryland, and I actually, up until maybe about 2 minutes ago, I would have said that this was a fairly optimistic, tenured conversation overall. Now I'm thinking back to the AI 2027 manifesto and all of the doomer conversations. But I was going to ask you about Ukraine, because Mr. Jones, for the complexity of the story, fundamentally casts Ukraine in a kind of a hopeful light. I found the epilogue to Green Border to be very troubling in a lot of ways. I assume you intended it that way, because on the one hand, that is the kind of utopian vision that I imagine perhaps you alluding to when you're talking about utopia, the solidarity that we see. But there's a vulgarity to that solidarity in light of the racial dimension, in light of the performance that's been throughout the entire film. So, I mean, my question isn't actually specifically about Green Border. It's about Ukraine more generally, how you see it fitting in to this sort of potential for a utopian turn, because it didn't feel that way to me. It was actually one of the few things that really stood out as being kind of surprisingly dystopian at the end of Green Border. Anyway, thank you.
Well, I'm not sure if I understand why it was dystopian to you.
Well, because in some sense also Ukraine has motivated PO and had been a sort of a hook for PO to pull on and amplify some of its more illiberal tendencies, illiberal tendencies that are picked from peace, right? So in that sense, we go through a whole film of watching a lot of inhumanity on the part of the Polish state to seeing humanity exercised by the Polish state, and it's because they're white, the people on the other side of the fence.
Well, yeah, it means, but I don't think that it fits the terms utopian or dystopian. I think that is a simple reality about the human beings, that we are as capable of the good as we are capable of evil. But to preserve the good, to do it, to have that positive connection to another group of people or individual human being, it needs a lot of work. and it needs a lot of efforts. It has been encouraged by the authorities, the religious authorities, the political authorities, some kind of the authorities. And evil is terribly easy. It spreads like the wild weed very quickly. You don't need to cultivate it. You need a little of encouragement, and it explodes. So to me, the reaction of Poles after full-scale invasion in Ukraine and that massive wave of the refugees from Ukraine have been very touching. It means, and very optimistic somehow, that even
it's fading.
Yes. And I thought that it will last, because I'm pessimist, like existential pessimist. I thought that it will last like 3 months, 4 months, and it lasted like about 2 years with the similar kind of the extent. Now it's evaporating. It's a lot of work also from politicians and a lot of work from Russian bots, but still that grain of the solidarity is there, which I think is always better than the opposite, isn't it? Thank you.
All right, thank you. This is the end of our time. Agnieszka, I'd like to thank you for an extraordinary discussion.